I think this is the most fascinating country I've been to. I mean, I know that's a strong statement. I've been to some incredibly diverse and unique places in the world, but you will find so many things here that you won't find anywhere else.
This is Ethiopia! Ethiopia! Ethiopia!
It's a place known for feasting and fasting, fast runners, forests, deserts, diversity, devotion. And if the first thing you think of when you hear of Ethiopia has something to do with famine or hunger, I hope that's no longer the case once you've seen the things I've seen. Sure, poverty and food insecurity, they're persistent and one of the country's biggest problems. But it's not fair to one of the most culturally rich places on Earth to be just seen by its problems. There's so much more here. We could talk about how this is the birthplace of coffee, how one of our oldest ancestors was found there, so perhaps it's the birthplace of humanity. And it makes sense to me that the birthplace of humanity would overlap with coffee. We could talk about deeper cuts, the distinctiveness of Ethiopian jazz and that whole scene. A cuisine that plays to all five senses, a royal and religious history, a beautiful but challenging language. These are just some of the reasons why I'm leaning towards calling Ethiopia the most fascinating place I've been. Ethiopia, why are you so cool? Is it because you've never been colonized? Actually, that probably has a lot to do with it. So one of the things, of course, that stands out about Ethiopia is its history of having never been colonized. I think that's the big reason why Ethiopian culture has been so distinct. You find things here that you won't find in any other place, from the Ethiopian calendar to the Amharic alphabet. Unfortunately, in a lot of other parts of the continent, you find a lot of blurriness around the origins of certain customs or practices and where they came from. But in Ethiopia, things go back centuries. I'm in Ethiopia to visit Plant with Purpose's program sites and record some videos. The Ethiopia program was the first one that launched after I began working for Plant with Purpose, so it holds a special place, and I can't wait to see it. But before we get there, we've got to pass through Ethiopia's capital. We made it to Ethiopia. Addis Ababa is one of Africa's largest gateways. Many of my Ethiopian friends actually discouraged me from spending a whole lot of time here, saying it was chaotic and crowded and that more of the country's beauty and tradition would be found outside the city. It's not an uncommon perspective, but still, I was sure a day in Addis Ababa would yield some interesting sights. We started out at the Shola Marketplace because... You may have already heard me say this, but I think the best way to get to know a place, to really get to know it, is to head to the market. See where people get food, because what symbolizes everyday life better than that? So we're stopping by the Shola Market. And what do you know? There's a warm heart to Addis Ababa. Our guide, Bule, filled us in on what we were seeing. Lots of hand-woven products, smaller baskets, which are a household staple for keeping injera fresh. This marketplace was full of grains and spices. It seemed like every corner was bursting with smells so strong you could taste them at the same time. Spice and aroma is a major part of Ethiopian cuisine, something I would get to know really well during my time here. Our next stop was the Ethiopian National Museum. I truly didn't know what to expect inside, but there was at least one very noteworthy exhibit. Lucy. At least what's left of her. Lucy, aka Dinknesh, was a fossil of a human ancestor discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Her remains were about 40% intact, and at the time nobody had ever found a set of remains so old and so complete. This was easily the biggest discovery related to human lineage. I guess in 1994, another fossil, Artie, was discovered that was 1 million years older than Lucy, but somehow Lucy maintained greater notoriety. It's pretty surreal. I remember, reading about Lucy in, my 6th grade textbooks, and it's now, here she is in real life. The stuff you get to grow up and do. Lucy wasn't the only wonder in this museum. An entire display set Bule up to get me caught up to speed on the past 200 years of Ethiopian history. Fascinating stuff, and they weren't shy about all the times they defeated Italy to keep their independence. Ethiopia has such a rich history. Like, you've got Lucy, origin of coffee, origins of early Christianity. This is so impressive. From there, we went off to Entoto Park at Mount Entoto. The Entoto Mountains tower over Addis Ababa, making this the spot to get a good view of the whole city. This area was gorgeous. Being at elevation, the air is crisp and fresh. There was a restaurant, several monuments and displays, and it was simply a great place to walk. I had one of those moments where I just let it sink in, how lucky I was to have wound up with a life that lets me come to places like Addis Ababa, to see things that I used to read about in books, like Lucy, and to taste things like incredible Ethiopian food. How have we not talked about that yet? Ethiopian food is amazing. Look at this place. This is where we're eating lunch. And this apparently used to be the house of the emperor's daughter, who was also ruler of Ethiopia for a 3-year window. And of course, our first big meal in Ethiopia would have to be injera. I don't think I need to spend a whole lot of time describing the sour pancake that's Ethiopia's staple. It's made from a grain called teff, but Ethiopian cuisine is popular in cities all over the world, so you've likely already had this. Ethiopian cuisine has many entries. Now, to once again address this association that many people have between Ethiopia and hunger, I'll just have to say this. My biggest struggle in Ethiopia was keeping up with the serving sizes. They were massive. Do you know how much of an accomplishment it is to have visitors from the United States of America consistently remark that your food portions are too big? I've come to think of Ethiopian food as the opposite of fast food. Think about it. Nothing about this is fast. It's meant for nourishment, not convenience. Just try and take one of these platters on the go without looking silly. This food is cooked for long periods of time. The batter takes its time to ferment and gain its flavor. The meats are slow cooked, the lentils stew all day. And while fast food is something you consume when you're all alone, safe from judging eyes, and perhaps within 5 minutes of leaving the drive-thru, Ethiopian food? It's meant to be eaten in good company. The food, the experience, even the smells, shared. Let me introduce you to Ethiopia's party drink, Turbo. Forget everything you know about the rules around mixing drinks. This stuff contains. So, white wine and beer.
Beer, Sprite, ice, and cold. Okay. Mixed together.
This analogy might not land with anybody, but I feel like it's gonna taste like losing King's Cup. Turbo. So, when do people usually drink this?
For special, occasion, right? Maybe for Easter or for a wedding.
Okay.
New Year. Yeah.
So it's not just like after work?
Yeah.
No, okay. I'll say this, while the recipe for Turbo sounds like chaos, it's not bad. The fruit pieces and wine in there make it feel a bit like sangria. I don't know if I'm gonna be recreating it at home much, but I'm glad I tried it here. Now, Turbo is an interesting experience, but you already know that is not Ethiopia's most famous beverage. That distinction goes to none other than coffee. In fact, Ethiopia is probably the birthplace of coffee. And if that's the case, man, this country has really blessed the whole world. Maybe it makes sense that human species and coffee originated in the same country. So in Ethiopia, the main story behind the origin of coffee is a goat herder named Kaldi, who one day comes back to find his pasture of goats all dancing and jumping and having a great time, and he discovers that they've been snacking on some seeds of this Kofisa plant. Turns out to be the cherries of coffee fruit. And he, eventually figures out how to roast those beans, and the rest is history. And now this is the kind of story where the line between truth and myth is blurry. At some point somebody discovered the properties of caffeine, so why couldn't it have been a goat herder? What's undeniable is that Ethiopian coffee is a whole other level. It's drank throughout the day. Every meeting, greeting, and change of scenery seem to be punctuated by another cup. The smell of the experience seemed to matter just as much as the taste of the beverage. In rural and remote settings, the proper coffee ceremony was observed. In offices and hotel lobbies, the ceremony was also observed. Coffee and food are just a couple elements distinct to Ethiopia. There's just a simple way things are done differently here because it's Ethiopia. And my favorite example of this just might have to be the Ethiopian calendar. In Ethiopia, right now, it's 2016. Like the Gregorian calendar used by most of the world, year zero began with the birth of Christ. However, in Ethiopia, they calculated that to be 7 years later.
Now we are in 2015. We are 8 years behind. When you land at the airport, your age is automatically reduced by 8 years. The calendar is based on Ethiopian Orthodox Church. We have 13 months.
This lended itself to giving Ethiopia a quirky but accurate claim of having 13 months of sunshine.
1 month at the end of August is 5 days.
This bonus month is a short one, and also has a religious role. It's a time for cleansing and heavy bathing. After some great times in Addis Ababa, it was time to meet my Ethiopian colleagues in the Amhara region.
Off to Bahar Dar, starting now.
We made it to the quiet city that sits at the source of the Nile River. Along the way, we met with Yekino and Abel, two filmmakers who would be accompanying us on the storytelling trip. I was completely eager to get out into the field with Yekino and Abel, but first, we met up with the team for dinner and a night out. The day after all that, we drove several hours into Amhara. We arrived at the village of Birthplace and met with a group that started working with Plant with Purpose.
ነበረ በፊት እሱን ተከፋፍዬ ያረቄ ማውጣት ስራ ተሰማራሁ ሚስቴ ሞያ አላት እሱን ተሰማራሁ አረቄ ማውጣት ጀመርኩ
Tadele and Hana have a lot of projects that they were able to start thanks to Plant with Purpose's support. Among their income-generating activities is a tea shop and tavern that became a gathering hub for the whole community. They kept talking about areke, so I had to ask.
Okay, I'm going to try a traditional Ethiopian liquor. It's areke. Areke. You can know how is it made?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's really good.
Okay, yeah. Even better. There's mystery to it.
Yes.
Is there like a word for cheers?
Letinachin.
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 For my health.
Oh, the smell is good. Okay, that's smooth.
Yeah. Smooth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You want to add more?
It's fine now. Yeah, I'm a signalo.
If I had to compare areke to anything, I'd say mild tequila. But don't be fooled. This stuff can run up to 80 proof alcohol. Not far from Tadele and Hana's bar is Mulu's house. Mulu has a disability that prevents him from being able to do most forms of work. However, his main activity is designing traditional Ethiopian textiles, and this has created an opportunity for him. Plant with Purpose enabled him to take out a loan from his neighbors, which became capital for his project.
Okay.
His clothwork now brings in a steady income. No matter where we are, we share a common home. But I think it becomes easier to take care of your home when you truly feel a sense of belonging to it. When you can celebrate all the traditions, differences, and distinctives that make it what it is. Whether it's the calendar you use, or the care that goes into each pour of coffee, the details on every stitch, the role your home plays in human history, the way neighbors move forward together, or the simple abundance of sweet spirits. Here, this is Ethiopia, and I am so glad I came.